Thank you for joining us here today. I want to thank Anthony Guerrero and Massport for hosting us today. They are great partners and our Commonwealth's gateway to the rest of the world. I actually came through those doors at 11:30 last night, landing here at the Delta terminal. Right after we had just voted on passage of the FAA authorization. So the FAA bill was taking off down in Washington successfully, and then I got on a plane and just landed right here at Delta. And I'm just glad to be back here again right now to talk about the success that was the FAA Reauthorization bill in terms of the consumer protections that were built into that legislation. So we're celebrating a milestone for the flying public today. Let's call it Fee-Free Friday because of the legislation which passed last night. Fee-Free Friday for passengers all across our nation. Last night, when the Senate passed the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Act, it is now containing legislation which I wrote out of the Senate Commerce Committee after working on it for the last 2 years. And at last, with this long delay, the traveling public will finally get some long overdue recompense. Today, I'm proud to say that after working hard to clear the runway, the FAA bill is ready for takeoff. And the legislation is fully booked with wins for consumers, for workers, and for our climate. For example, the FAA bill includes my legislation, the Families Fly Together Act, that bans fees for parents so that they can sit next to their children on a plane. That is now going to be outlawed. Parents and families should never have to empty their pockets just to sit next to their kids. There should never be extra charges for families to have to sit next to their children on a plane, and my legislation that passed last night will ban that practice forever. I first introduced that bill in 2019, and it's bipartisan. I partnered with Senator J.D. Vance, Republican from Ohio, to ensure this bipartisan issue would be resolved in this FAA bill. And every step of the legislative process, I have fought to ensure that FAA stands for families ahead of airlines. And that is what this legislation did last night, to give the protections to the families which they need. I also fought hard to ensure airlines cannot take advantage of passengers when they cancel or significantly delay their flight. During COVID-19 pandemic, the airlines improperly withheld billions of dollars in refunds owed to consumers. And when they weren't withholding the refunds entirely, airlines would give consumers a flight voucher that expired in just a few months or a year. During the darkest days of pandemic, when air traffic effectively stopped, those fast expiring vouchers might as well have been monopoly money. They were worthless. So when passengers don't want to get on a plane because of disease, and the airline gives vouchers to passengers that expire in 3 months, even as the pandemic continues, those vouchers are useless. They're valueless. So what I have done is repeatedly called out the airlines for that outrageous conduct. And now, thanks to this FAA bill, consumers won't be left grounded after a major flight disruption. The FAA bill makes it the responsibilities of the airline, not tired, stressed out passengers, to ensure travelers get the refunds they deserve after a cancellation or a delay. So my bill says that if you want it, you just get the cash back. And they give you the cash. And if you will accept a voucher, then it will last for 5 years so that the passenger is able to determine when they want to use that voucher. Not something that expires like it's a Christmas card that you're given, told that it will expire in 3 months or 6 months. No. The passenger should get cash if the flight is canceled, not a voucher. But if the passenger will accept a voucher, that voucher has to last at least 5 years to guarantee that the passenger is in the driver's seat and not the airlines. The airlines took advantage of passengers, tipping them upside down and shaking money out of their pockets. This legislation, which I passed last night, is going to give the power to the passengers and not to the airlines to determine what that cash payment looks like or a voucher in substitution for it. So the public can now fly with confidence, knowing their vouchers won't expire as quickly as the milk in their refrigerator. And that is the goal which has now finally been accomplished to protect the consumers. When it comes to flying, protecting consumers and protecting workers go hand in hand. That is why I fought hard alongside the SEIU, the CWA, Unite Here, to include my Good Jobs for Good Airports Act, which would have created a standard for wages and benefits for our airport service workers. While we were unable to secure the full bill due to Republican opposition, this legislation recognizes the critical contributions of these workers and creates a platform for the Department of Transportation and labor groups to identify ways to improve the pay, ways to improve the benefits and working conditions for the workers at airports. Airport service workers are the backbone of our aviation industry. Just as planes can't fly without pilots, our aviation system would crash without airport service workers. And this provision recognizes their importance and lays the foundation for further action. The hidden figures in this airport right now are the baggage handlers, the wheelchair attendants. They are the cabin cleaners, the people who clean the toilets here. They're all hidden figures, and they do not get the compensation that they deserve. So that has been my goal, to make sure that all of those people, especially during the pandemic, who had to show up every day, risk their family getting COVID, so that all the rest of us would be protected, get the fair wages, the protections which they deserve as well. And finally, this legislation addresses the rising threat that climate change poses to our airports. Many of our nation's biggest airports, including right here at Logan, are at risk of sea level rise. Logan Airport is largely built on landfill that extended out here into Boston Harbor. Well, Boston Harbor is the second fastest warming body of water on the planet. And we need to prepare for the climate change impacts that are inevitably going to be coming towards the city of Boston, towards Boston Harbor, towards Logan Airport, and airports all across our country. Many of our nation's biggest airports, including right here, are at sea level risk. The changing climate also brings extreme heat that can melt runways and extreme storms that can damage airport infrastructure. So, again, I worked with Republican Senator from Alaska, Dan Sullivan, and I successfully fought for $1 billion in new funding to invest in airport climate resiliency. And that $1 billion is going to be the beginning of a process by which we have to harden our airports against the threat of climate change, because it's coming. It's coming fast and furious towards airports, including Logan, all across our country. Logan is our gateway to the world, and this year's reauthorization is the gateway to a transportation future that is pro-consumer, pro-worker, pro-planet, and we are going to have to continue to build on that in the future. But for families now, they're not going to have to pay fees to sit next to each other. For passengers whose planes have been canceled, they can get a cash refund and not a voucher. But if they want it, a voucher that will last 5 years and not 5 minutes, which is the way in which the airlines were treating those passengers. So I thank all of you for coming out here today, and I look forward to any questions which you may have.